Maya had a folder on her laptop called Financial Plan. She'd created it 5 years ago. Inside were 5 documents: a budget template she downloaded from a personal finance website, a spreadsheet with her monthly income and fixed expenses already filled in, a list of her debts in order from smallest to largest, a screenshot of an article about index funds she'd meant to read properly, and a note she'd written to herself titled, "Goals, Start This Month." She had never opened the folder again after the day she made it. Not because she forgot. Not because things got better and she no longer needed it. She knew the folder was there. She thought about it sometimes, usually late on a Sunday evening when the week ahead felt heavy and the number in her checking account felt thin. She just never opened it. Maya is 31 years old. She has a master's degree in public health. She earns $64,000 a year. She can explain in clear and intelligent terms exactly what she should be doing with her money. The debt avalanche method, the 50-30-20 budgeting rule, the importance of an emergency fund before you invest. She has read the articles, she has watched the videos, she has on at least 4 separate occasions sat down to finally get serious and then quietly, without drama, stopped. She knows what to do. She has never done it. And the question that nobody around her has thought to ask, including Maya herself until recently, is why. The obvious answer is motivation. She just doesn't want it badly enough. If she really wanted financial stability, she'd do the work. She'd stick to the budget. She'd transfer money into savings before she could spend it. She'd stop letting the folder sit unopened. The gap between knowing and doing in this reading of things is a character gap, a willpower gap, a gap that says something uncomfortable about who Maya is and how seriously she takes her own future. That's a hard story, and Maya has told it to herself more times than she'd admit. But here's what that story gets wrong. Willpower is not a stable resource. Behavioral psychologists have known for decades that the capacity to act on what we know is not fixed. It depletes, it fluctuates, it responds to stress and sleep and emotional load in ways that have nothing to do with intelligence or intention. A person can know, with complete clarity, that they should eat differently, exercise more, call their doctor, repair a relationship, and still not do it. Not because they don't care, but because knowing and doing are processed by different systems in the brain, and those systems don't automatically communicate. The knowing lives in the prefrontal cortex, the planning part of the brain, the part that can hold a 10-year vision of your life with complete clarity while you make a decision that contradicts it entirely. The doing requires activation, emotional momentum, and a felt sense that the action is both possible and worth the discomfort it will cause right now. When those two things don't connect, you get Maya's folder, full of correct information, never opened. This gap between knowing what to do and being unable to make yourself do it has a name in psychology. It's called the intention-action gap, and it is one of the most researched and least discussed phenomena in behavioral science. Researchers have found it everywhere, in health behavior, in environmental action, in financial decision-making. People consistently overestimate their ability to convert intention into behavior. They make plans. They believe the plans. They don't follow them. But understanding that the gap exists doesn't explain why Maya's gap is so persistent, so specific, so resistant to all the times she's tried to close it. For that, you have to go a little deeper than behavioral science. You have to go into Maya's life. Maya grew up in a household where money was managed by anxiety, not by plan. Her mother handled the finances. Not because she was particularly skilled at it, by her own admission she wasn't, but because her father, who earned more and spent more freely, was not someone you could have a calm conversation with about a credit card statement. So her mother tracked every dollar in a small notebook, paid bills the day they arrived, and never, not once in Maya's memory, bought something for herself without first checking the notebook and then waiting a day before deciding. Maya watched this. Children always watch, even when nobody thinks they are. What she absorbed was not a system. What she absorbed was the feeling that money management was an act of vigilance, that staying on top of your finances was something you did under pressure, not something that created ease. That the notebook wasn't a tool, it was a shield, and that the alternative to constant vigilance was the version of things her father represented, spending freely, not tracking, creating problems other people had to quietly clean up. She didn't want to be her father. She didn't want to be her mother either. She wanted something she had no model for, a relationship with money that felt neither anxious nor reckless, calm, organized, easy. But she had no emotional template for what that looked like. She'd only ever seen two versions and she'd rejected both of them. So when Maya, at 24, first started earning her own income, something strange happened. She became extraordinarily good at knowing what she should do. She read everything. She understood compound interest, debt management, the psychology of spending. She could hold a conversation about financial planning that would make a financial advisor nod with respect. And she could not make herself open a budget spreadsheet without feeling a tightening in her chest that she couldn't name. At 26, she had a conversation with a friend who'd just paid off her student loans. The friend was elated. She talked about the system she'd used, the sacrifices she'd made, the feeling of finally being free from it. Maya listened and felt something she wasn't expecting. Not inspiration, not motivation. Dread. A quiet, shapeless dread that she recognized but couldn't explain. She went home and opened her laptop. She found the personal finance website. She downloaded the budget template. She created the folder. She wrote the note to herself. Goals start this month. And then she made dinner and watched television and didn't think about the folder for 3 weeks. This is the pattern that defined the next several years of Maya's life. A cycle she couldn't quite see while she was inside it. Something would trigger awareness, a conversation, an unexpected expense, a birthday that made her think about where she was relative to where she'd imagined she'd be. She'd feel the urgency, she'd research, she'd plan, she'd create a document or a folder or a system. And then, within days, sometimes hours, the momentum would dissolve, the system would sit untouched, the urgency would fade, and Maya would be left with the faint, persistent sense that she had failed at something, without being able to say exactly what. At 28, she finally got a gym membership and used it for 4 months before stopping. She noticed something. The pattern was the same. The intention was always real. The action always started. The continuation always collapsed. She thought about this for a long time. She brought it up, sideways and carefully, with a therapist she'd started seeing for what she'd described as general anxiety. She said something like, "I know what I should be doing, with money and other things, and I just can't seem to make myself do them." And the therapist asked her something that stopped her mid-sentence. She asked, "What do you imagine will happen if you actually do them?" Maya opened her mouth to answer, and realized she didn't have one. She'd thought about the goal, financial stability, less anxiety, a sense of control. She'd never thought about what it would mean to get there, what her life would look like, what it would feel like. Because somewhere underneath the folder and the budget templates and the 5 documents she'd never finished reading, there was a belief Maya hadn't examined. A belief that had been quietly shaping every decision she'd made about money for 7 years. The belief was this, that getting her finances in order was not something she was the kind of person who did. Not because she thought badly of herself. She didn't, particularly. She was competent in almost every other area of her life. Professionally accomplished, emotionally intelligent, good at most things she applied herself to. But money felt different. Money felt like the place where she was, fundamentally and possibly permanently, not quite capable of the thing that was required, and acting on that belief, going through the motions of setting up a budget, of tracking spending, of building an emergency fund, felt in a way she could never quite articulate, like setting herself up to discover that the belief was true. If she never really tried, she could never really fail. The folder stayed closed because opening it meant something. It meant committing to a version of herself she wasn't sure she could be. That's the thing nobody tells you about the intention-action gap. It's not always laziness. It's not always fear of effort. Sometimes it's a very quiet, very rational feeling form of self-protection. The brain avoids actions that carry the risk of confirming its worst beliefs about itself. And it does this without ever announcing what it's doing. Or why. At 29, Maya's car needed a repair she hadn't budgeted for. $460. She put it on her credit card. She already had $2,000 on that card from other things she hadn't budgeted for. She sat in the parking lot of the mechanic and felt for a few minutes completely hollow. She called her sister, not to talk about money. Her sister didn't know the details of her financial situation, and Maya wasn't planning to tell her. She called because she needed to hear a voice that wasn't the one in her own head. Her sister asked how she was. Maya said, "Fine, just dealing with some stuff." Her sister said, "Same," and then talked for 20 minutes about her own life, and Maya listened and felt marginally better and drove home and did not open the folder. But something was different after the parking lot. Something small had shifted. She started noticing the thought. Not the spending, not the avoidance, the thought that preceded it. The moment where she'd be about to do something financially responsible and something in her would deflect. She started asking herself, just as an exercise and not with any expectation of it helping, what am I actually afraid of here? The answer surprised her. Not the bill itself, not the number, not even the work of building a budget. She was afraid of the version of herself that would have to exist to maintain it. She was afraid that version of herself would be her mother, anxious, vigilant, permanently on guard. She was afraid that caring about money meant becoming someone for whom money was a source of constant management and worry, rather than just a thing that existed in the background. She wanted to be the kind of person who didn't have to think about money all the time. And she had been avoiding the tools that would have helped her get there because she'd confused the tools with the anxiety. She'd confused the notebook with the stress it was trying to manage. The shift for Maya wasn't a dramatic one. There was no moment where everything clicked and she suddenly became someone who opened spreadsheets with ease. That's not how these things work, and pretending it is would be doing you a disservice. What shifted was her understanding of what the folder meant. She'd been treating the unopened folder as evidence of a character flaw, as proof that she was someone who couldn't follow through, couldn't take herself seriously, couldn't do the basic adult thing that everyone around her seemed to manage without visible effort. But the folder wasn't evidence of a flaw. It was evidence of a belief formed quietly over years from watching money be handled with anxiety and equating careful financial management with the particular kind of suffering her mother had carried. A belief that had been protecting her, in its own confused way, from something she'd never actually stopped to examine. There's a concept in psychology called identity-based behavior, the idea that the most durable changes people make aren't the ones driven by goals or plans, but the ones driven by a shift in how they see themselves. You don't build the habit of exercising by trying harder. You build it by slowly becoming the kind of person who exercises. The behavior follows the identity, not the other way around. Maya's problem had never been the plan. Her plans were excellent. Her knowledge was real. Her problem was that none of her planning had ever touched the question of who she believed herself to be in relation to money. And until that question was asked, no folder, no template, no budgeting app was ever going to stay open longer than a week. She's still working on it. She opened the folder a few months ago. She deleted 3 of the 5 documents because they were from a version of her life that no longer applied. She kept the spreadsheet and updated the numbers. She didn't feel the tightening in her chest, or if she did, she recognized it for what it was and stayed with it anyway. It's not fixed, but it's different. I want to leave you with something to sit with, not something to do. If you recognize any part of Maya's story, the folder, the templates, the plans that start with real intention and dissolve within days, I'd ask you to sit with one question before you open another browser tab or download another budgeting app. Ask yourself, What do I actually believe will happen if I get this right? Not what you hope will happen. Not the goal. What you believe, in the quiet and honest part of your mind, will be true about your life and about you if you genuinely sort out your finances. Because sometimes the goal we say we want and the outcome we actually believe is possible are two different things, and the gap between them is exactly the size of the intention-action gap. There's another question worth sitting with. Is there anyone in your past whose relationship with money you absorbed, not chose, just absorbed, that you're still either imitating or running from? Because the financial behaviors we learned before we had language for money are often the ones that run most quietly and most persistently in the background of every adult financial decision we make. And the last one, the quietest one. If you've been avoiding taking action on something you know is important, is it possible that the avoidance is protecting you from something? Not laziness, not weakness, but protection. From what exactly is the question only you can answer? These aren't questions with clean answers. They're questions you carry, you let them sit, you see what they surface over time. That's the work that actually precedes the spreadsheet. Maya's folder is still on her laptop. She's renamed it. It doesn't say financial plan anymore. It says, simply, mine. I don't know exactly what she means by that, but I think I understand it. I think it means that the relationship with money she's trying to build isn't her mother's relationship, isn't her father's, isn't the one she absorbed from a finance article or a podcast or a well-meaning friend. It's hers. Built at the pace she can actually sustain, with the understanding she actually has, on the foundation of having finally asked herself why she was avoiding this instead of just assuming she knew. That's not a small thing. Most people never stop to ask why. They experience the gap, the knowing without doing, the plans without follow-through, the folders that stay closed, and they fill the gap with judgment. They call themselves lazy, undisciplined, not serious enough. They try harder with the same broken tools and wonder why nothing changes. The question isn't always what you should be doing. Sometimes the only question that matters is what's been making it so hard to start.